Well, good morning, Marine. This is cool, huh? If you're new with us today, thanks for being here. If this is your first time, my name's Chad. I am the worship director here at Marine, and it's a real privilege to preach, to bring the word to you this morning. Our pastor is on away for 8 weeks on a time of renewal with his wife, Kim, and so he's asked several of us to kind of fill in and carry the pulpit for him while he's gone, and so he asked me, and naturally he asked me to speak on the topic of worship. Those of you who remember me preaching a while back, remember me bringing a sandwich to the sermon. I have no food for you today. So I don't want to disappoint. I want to get that out there. Don't anticipate any food flying from the pulpit this morning. Back at the beginning of this sermon series, we're in a sermon series called Renewal in the Spirit. And back at the beginning of this series, we heard that the disciplines were things we could do to put ourselves in a place where God could transform us. The whole reason we put this series together was for this. Do we want God to transform us? Obviously, the answer for most of us is yes. But for God to do that, we have to be willing to put ourselves into a process where we train ourselves for godliness. And that's where the spiritual disciplines come in. Now, worship as a discipline basically means this. If worship is going to be a discipline, it's going to be more than just saying, God, I worship you, and then going on with the rest of your day. It's going to be more than a head thing. There's going to be things that you see physically, tangibly in your life that are reflective of a discipline of worship. And the end goal of all of this, obviously, is to train ourselves in godliness so that God would transform us for the glory of his name and for the profession of who he is to those who are around us. And if we want to experience God's grace, which I'm praying most of us do, if we want to experience the power of God in our life, if we want to be transformed, we're going to put ourselves to the discipline of worship. Worship as discipline is central to all the other disciplines. And here's what I mean. If you were to take the spiritual discipline of worship and focus on that particular discipline, all of the other disciplines will flow from it. But the opposite is also true. If you were to take all the spiritual disciplines and concentrate all of them will lead to a spiritual discipline of worship. Take for the example of study. If I'm going to apply myself to the discipline of study, I'm first going to bring myself to the Word, right? So that I can know God more. What's the point of knowing God more? So that I would worship him. But the opposite is also true. If I'm going to take the week, the day, the moment that I have and apply myself to the discipline of worship, there's going to come a point in time where I'm going to want to know him more. And just singing a song and raising my hands and loving those people around me isn't going to be enough. I'm going to have to come back to the Word. Do you see how it becomes central? So this discipline of worship is so central that if you miss today, all of these other disciplines will kind of be hung in suspension. And so I want to challenge you today to follow along with me because I'm hoping that by the end of this morning, God will so capture your heart with who he is. God will so capture your heart with what he wants to do with you in your life that all you're going to want to do when you leave here is worship. Take out your Bibles. Open up to John chapter 4. The topic of worship is huge. And so to take 30 minutes and basically lay out all the things you could say about worship would be almost impossible. So what I want to do today is give you a big picture. If I can give you a big sum of what I think God has taught me about the discipline of worship, hopefully you'll have that big picture, that big umbrella idea, and then as you grow in your walk with God and as you grow in this discipline of worship, all the other things will flow from it. And in John chapter 4, we have probably one of the most pivotal conversations known in the Scriptures. It's an event that defines for us the where and the how of worship. Now catch this. The where and the how of worship are huge to God. They are so important to him that he lays out in Scripture the where and the how to fine detail. In the Old Testament, leading up to the point of Christ's resurrection, where was worship to take place? The temple. In the Old Testament, you have the tabernacle. Basically, the Holy of Holies. This is where God resided, right? One place. And how were they to worship? Read the book of Exodus and Leviticus. It's filled with detail about how the people were come to approach God and worship. When, where, how, what they should wear, what they should be doing, what they should say, what they should sacrifice. The list goes on. So the where and the how are huge to God. So when we come to John 4, what you're going to see Jesus do is he's going to involve himself in a conversation with a Samaritan woman. And in this conversation, he's going to basically obliterate the location and the how of worship. And he's going to redefine it. You see, God has a better way for people to worship him. There's a better way. The old way of worship was limited. How do I know it was limited? If you look at the book of Hebrews and you understand what Hebrews says about worship, you will see that the old style of worship was built on high priests who were limited in their own sin, in their own weakness. So even the high priest who was called to go into the Holy of Holies and be in the presence of God, he himself was sinful, correct? So what did he have to do 364 days of the year? He had to cleanse himself every day so that the one day of the year he could go in and present himself to God and offer a sacrifice on behalf of the sins of the people. Why is this a better way? What do you know the difference between that priest and Jesus? Jesus was perfect, right? So here's what Jesus does. The perfect priest goes in and presents himself, right? So therefore, no longer do we need to have a sacrifice for sin. This is a better way. This is a better way for you. Can you imagine what it would be like if every day you had to cleanse yourself from your sin and never feel forgiven, and every day you woke up with the guilt of what you've done to be dishonest or to disconnect yourself from God? All of that's been erased. You're free. You're free to worship. So in this chapter, we see this awesome conversation. And again, like I said, Jesus changes the where and the how. Look at verse 7 of chapter 4. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Now, where is Samaria? Samaria is between Judea and Galilee. Jesus is on his way to Galilee, and the quickest point from those two locations is through Samaria. And Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, now, think about this for a second. If I've been in the desert and I'm thirsty and I look at a woman and I say, "Will you please give me a drink of water?" And she looks at me and she doesn't give me a drink of water, don't you think that would be odd? She doesn't give him water. What does she do? She questions him. "How is that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" Now, what is she enlightening here, you two? Basically, she's saying this. The Samaritans and the Jews don't get along. It's like Cubs and Sox fans. So for a Jew to be asking for water from a Samaritan was really, really not cool. So she's confused by this. Verse 10, Jesus answers her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you the living water. Had you known who I was, rather than giving me water, rather than questioning me about me asking for water, you in turn would have asked me for water." And in this conversation about water, Jesus presents this idea to her that he is the source of living water. Now think about this. This is one conversation, and there's two parallels. There's a spiritual implication to this conversation, and there's an earthly parallel to this conversation. The woman is down here. She's not realizing, first of all, who she's talking to, nor is she realizing the spiritual implications of what Jesus is saying to her, okay? She has not been enlightened to Jesus at this moment. But Jesus is up here having this spiritual conversation going, "Psst, wake up. Hello, I've got living water for you." And this is what he says to her. "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again." I'm in verse 13. "But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Now, doesn't this sound pretty awesome? If I'm a woman and every day I have to go to Jacob's well and draw water out of this well in the middle of the desert, isn't that hard work? Can you imagine what it would be like if someone came to me and said I never had to do that again? From a practical earthly standpoint, this is great news to her. So what does she say? "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Do you see what she's saying? I don't want to have to come back here again to get water, so give me the water. It's still a very earthly response. She's not seeing the spiritual implications of this conversation yet. And so what does Jesus do? Does he give her water? No. He changes the conversation again and says, go get your husband. Now think about this. She asks for water, and rather than giving it to her, he says, go get your husband. Clearly he's up to something. Clearly he knows something about this woman that she does not, maybe I should say, she's not willing to admit about herself. The woman answers him and says, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, you are right in saying I have no husband. For you have 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. So here's what he does. He exposes the sin that is in her heart. Now think about this. This woman is a Samaritan woman, probably very religious, probably does what she's supposed to do in the attitude of worship, in the realm of worship. So for her to go every day doing the rituals of worship, yet concealing her heart and carrying this sexual sin that Jesus exposes, there's not a truthfulness to her worship. So the woman says to him, sir, I perceive you're a prophet. Now this is interesting too, because at the very moment that he exposes her heart, she doesn't want to kind of get into it. So she changes the conversation again. I know you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place to worship. Here's what she's saying. Yeah, you just exposed my sin. Okay, yeah, you got me. But you know what? I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this legalistic ritual thing that we have going on between Samaritans and Jews on where we should worship. To me, that's more important in my heart. Let's not talk about that. And so what does Jesus do? Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. The hour is coming when the location of worship will not matter to you. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation comes from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Now, there's a lot here. And so what I want to do is I want to take just a few of the points that come out of this response of Jesus and lay a foundation for you about worship. The first thing you see Jesus say is that the location will no longer matter. This is massive to someone who has been worshiping in the temple for hundreds of years. To a culture that has been used to this process, to now say I'm not going to go there for worship is crazy. But then he also says, an hour is coming and has now come. The hour is coming is the time at which Jesus will rise from the dead and make things right once again. But it also says the hour has now come. What does he mean? Think about worship and where it's centralized and where it is focused. What is the object of worship? Jesus. Where is Jesus? He's there right now in front of this woman. So not only has the hour come, hi, I'm already here. Quite frankly, the location has already changed simply by me being born and walking on this earth. You can right now worship me. You don't need to be at the base of the mountain or in the Solomon's temple to worship. I'm right here. So he answers the location, the where, with the how. What's the how of worship? He says, the hour is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in what? Spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people. Then he says, God is spirit. There are 4 places in Scripture where the Bible defines God is and then something else. God is spirit, God is love, God is light, and God is a consuming fire. Now think about all 4 of those things that the Bible describes as God. Can you put them in a box? Can you take love and contain it? Can you take light and put it into a substance? Can you take a consuming fire and give it hands and feet? Can you take a spirit and put flesh around it? Well, God did, but we can't. So how is it then that worship of an uncontainable God should be contained to a location? Don't you think that the way God designed it, an uncontainable God would be worshiped with an uncontainable worship? Times were literally changing before this woman's eyes. For hundreds of years, worship had been confined to a location, but all of this was changing. No longer would a priest require a sacrifice one time a year in the Holy of Holies. No longer would the sacrifice of animals be sufficient for acceptable worship. Instead, God had a plan to restore worship and give humanity the chance to worship God the way he required. The requirement is spirit and truth. This is the case because God is spirit. Now, sometimes we try to break these two pieces apart. Yes, worship is spiritual, and yes, worship is truthful. They're of the same matrix. They can't be divided. If you do one and the other and not the other, you're not worshiping correctly. It's not acceptable worship. It's not the worship God designed. So it has to be both spiritual, both authentic, and both truthful, biblical, founded in Christ. Was the woman offering true worship? No. Why? Because she was hiding her sexual sin. You come here on Sunday morning, I come here on Sunday morning, and we present ourselves to worshiping God, and yet we resist him by carrying sin. Are we worshiping truthfully? No. That has to be taken care of. And so what does Jesus do? He exposes it so that he can restore worship to this woman's life. The Father is looking for worshipers who worship him the way he hears it, the way he sees it, the way he smells it. If we're going to worship a God who is spirit, then our worship must be done the same way. True worshipers will be those people who find the discussion of where obsolete. And dare I say this, true worshipers will find the discussion of style, tempo, musical preference to be completely obsolete. If your conversations are more about the style and content of worship, you're way off. That is not what God calls us to be doing. Jesus redesigns the way worship should be done, and by his death and resurrection gives us the ability to worship wherever we are. The redesign is so important that it's also the structure for eternity. Get this. Maybe in your mind you have a picture of what heaven will be like, and you see the throne of God, and you see this building. That's not eternity. Revelation 21 says that there will not be a temple in heaven. The temple will be the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. So what does that mean? If God is everywhere in eternity, where will worship take place? Everywhere. So God was like that at the beginning, right? Way back before the earth was created, this is how it was designed. And this is how it's supposed to look back on the other side when we get to eternity. But somewhere it got messed up. And so Jesus has to restore this. God has to send his son to die for our sins so that worship can be restored, so that no longer is confined to a temple, no longer confined to the sanctuary of the church building, but wherever you go and whatever you do. Yet here we are still living in the church age, stuck between the resurrection of Christ and the second coming. Still learning what it means to worship in spirit and truth. Still struggling to figure out how to worship God the way we're supposed to. I want to take a moment and pray. And this prayer comes from a collection of Puritan prayers called the Valley of Vision. And this prayer is a consecration of worship. So I'm just going to invite you to bow your heads with me as I read this prayer for us this morning. My God, I feel it is heaven to please thee, and to be what thou would hast me be. Oh, that I were holy as you are holy, pure as Christ is pure, perfect as your Spirit is perfect. These I feel are the best commands in your book. And yet shall I break them? Must I break them? Am I under such a necessity as long as I live here? Woe is me that I am a sinner, that I grieve this blessed God who is infinite in goodness and grace. If he would punish me for my sin, it would not wound my heart so deep to offend him. But though I sin continually, he continually repeats his kindness to me. At times I feel I could bear any suffering, but how can I dishonor this glorious God? What shall I do to glorify and worship this best of beings? Oh, that I could consecrate my soul, my body to his service, without restraint forever. Oh, that I would give myself up for him, so as never more to attempt to be on my own or have any will or affections that are not perfectly conformed to the will and to his love. But alas, I cannot live and not sin. Oh, may angels glorify him incessantly, and if possible, prostrate themselves lower before the blessed King of heaven. I long to bear a part with them in ceaseless praise. But when I have done all I can do up to eternity, I shall not be able to offer more than a small fraction of the homage that the glorious God deserves. Give me a heart full of divine heavenly love. In Jesus' name, amen. So how do we do a discipline of worship? The foundation's been laid. Now you get the idea. It's anytime, anywhere. But we don't do it. We creep back to the old way. We do things. Our hearts wander. The week passes by. Suddenly you're here on Sunday morning. Oops, I forgot to worship Monday through Saturday. Sometimes things need to change, and it's the discipline of worship that can create a life transformed. I want to take the rest of the morning to discover a well-known truth that all of you have heard before. But the problem with Christian truth is this. We've heard hundreds of them. And all these Christian truths can be revitalized in your soul and in your mind only when, by prayer and meditation, all of the mass hazy ideas that clutter your mind are wiped away, and this one spiritual truth that God has for you this morning rises to the top. Because worship can happen anytime, anywhere, and because God is constantly revealing his character in many ways, the discipline of worship weighs heavily on this point. Do you desire him? And so what I want to do is I want to give you just a few things that you can do as a discipline of worship to create this desire for him in your life, to position yourself so that God would transform you, just like these other disciplines that we've talked about. The first one is develop your foundation. We've kind of done this already today in talking about John 4, but let's expand it a little bit. Some of us have no idea what the Bible says about worship. Some of us have never opened the scriptures and studied the topic of worship. So I encourage you today, go home this week and study worship. Read Exodus and Leviticus. Read the book of Psalms. Read Malachi. Read Romans chapter 12. Read Colossians chapter 3. The Bible is filled with scriptures that speak to what God's heart is for worship. And once you've developed that foundation, then there's two other pieces that I want to encourage you with today. The first one is this: develop your sense for God. How many senses do we have? How many of those do you use in your relationship with Christ? We say all of them, but I'm not sure if I smell God very much. What's God smell like? I have no idea. I can't answer that question for you. Maybe Pat can do it when he comes back from renewal. We have all these senses that God has put into our system so that we can engage God on an intimate relational level. You see, God displays himself continually. Did you know that? Even when you don't sense him, even when you don't smell him, even when you don't hear him or see him or can touch him, God is continuing to display himself. Read Psalm 19. Psalm 19 says the character of God is constantly on display, day after day and night after night. God has displayed his love for us through his Son on the cross. God has sealed a promise by giving you the Spirit and indwelling you with his presence. So we need to make sure we're tuned into him. Each of us have 5 senses, and God calls us to use these for the glory of his name. God is seeking worshipers who have their senses tuned into him. God desires to have the hearts of his people. Think of this like beat 1 in a rhythm. Everybody go like this. Okay, now go boom. Boom, that's beat 1, okay? Now we're going to create a rhythm. I want to go boom and then tick. Are you with me? Ready? There you go. Ready? We nailed it. Ready? Again? Now, what's the temptation here? To go back to boom, right? So let's do that. All right, stop. This is beat 1, okay? Boom, God displays himself. Think of worship. Worship is a response to his divine intervention, his divine revelation, his divine revealing of his character. That's the only time that worship can happen. So if the boom happens and you miss it, there's no tick, right? So we got to get the boom down first in our life. So we've got to develop our senses for God so we actually see the boom. But what if I'm not convinced that God really desires to have a relationship with me? What if I'm convinced I really can't see the boom? What if life is so cluttered my situation, I'm so consumed by what's going in my life, I can't see this beat? Well, let me remind you of a few things. First of all, in creation, God designed the world in 6 days. On the 6th day, he created man and woman. And on that 6th day, he said that that creation was very good. The other 5 days were good, but this was very good. Meaning this, your design is so good to God, it's better than anything else he's put his time and effort into. And on top of that, your design is in his image. Nothing else bears his image. Everything displays his character. Certainly everything displays his glory, but nothing bears his thumbprint. You do. And think about this. After designing that, and after humanity fell into sin, what did God do to Adam and Eve? He went looking for them. Even in their shame, even when they were running from God and hiding from him, he went after them. Let me remind you of this. If something just happened to you and you don't understand why, and you're struggling to worship God, can I promise you this? God is in hard pursuit after you. It might not feel like it. It might not sound like it. It might not seem or look like it. But he is. I can promise you that. How else do I know this? Zephaniah 3 says this. He rejoices over us with gladness, quiets us with his love, and rejoices over us with singing. Even when you're not in a good mood, even when things are absolutely terrible, God is on top of you singing a glorious song over your life. Rejoicing over the creation that he's made. John 3 says that he sent his son to die for us so that our relationship would be fixed. Romans 5 says that God demonstrated his love for you by giving his son. John 15 says that he calls you a friend. He calls you chosen. He calls you appointed. Romans 8 says that nothing can separate you from the love of Christ. 1 John 4 says our love for him is an overflow of an already existing love coming to you. John chapter 1 says that we have been given a chance to be called a child of God. Matthew 6 says that his promise is to give us everything if we would seek after him. You hear the relationship there. Isaiah 41 says that he promises to be with us wherever we go, even when we don't know it. Psalm 147 says that he takes pleasure in us, those who fear him. And John 12 says at the point of resurrection, Jesus drew all men into him. So you can't tell me that Jesus has no interest in you. You can't tell me that God has no interest in having a relationship with you, because he does. And if you don't know it or don't sense it or don't see it, I promise you he's there. So if God has this huge heart for interacting with us, what are we missing? Why are we still struggling? Why are we missing this discipline of worship? Our hearts are so distracted. That's why. It's so distracting that the writer of Colossians in chapter 3 says, set your minds on the things above, because he knows very well that our minds are nowhere near there. My mind is not on the things above. It's on Michael Phelps and the fact that he just lost to Ryan Lochte. It's true. My eyes are like this to the Olympics. I'm so glad it's here. I'm not thinking about God. Our hearts are so distracted. There's way too much competition for the affections of my heart. There's way too much stuff in the world to fill my mind with thoughts that completely overwhelm my ability to see and understand and hear him. There's way too much in the way of me being with God. So I got to get rid of that stuff. I got to create space for worship. It's not just going to happen overnight. It's not just going to overflow suddenly. I've got to build that into my day. Monday through Saturday, in my office chair, at my breakfast table, in the seat of the subway, at the stadium when I go to a baseball game, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing. And the beauty of it is it's been designed to be that way. So you have beat one, right? Everybody go boom. What's the next part? The tick is your response. If God does everything he can do to reveal his character to you in your life, and you do not respond, you're not worshiping. Are you responding to him? How many moments in your day actually are in response to him versus responding to the external stuff happening around you? Complaining. Take complaining, for example. Boy, real quick, I'm sitting at a stoplight. I'm in the left-hand turn lane, and I'm waiting for my green arrow, and I don't get it. The 3 lanes go past me, and now I have to sit there for 2 minutes while rush hour traffic passes me, and then I have to run a red light just to make the left-hand turn. What's my response typically? Oh, there's no red or green arrow. That's my response. I got 2 minutes to worship, right? But this is the reality of our humanity. This is the reality of who we are. This is what we do on a regular basis. God is pouring himself out to you, and we're missing it. A lot of us are good at realizing that God was with us in the past. We can spend all this time and remember all the great things that God did for us. Also is true, we can come over here and look forward and put all of our hope and faith and trust into what God promises he's going to do all the way up into eternity. We're good with those points. It's the God with us part that we miss so frequently. We're good, God, the God who was and the God who is to come, but the God who is the point where we struggle the most. And this is where God is saying, I want to be God here too. I don't just want to be the God of your past and the God of your future. I want to be the God of this very moment. I want to be the God who's standing next to you when a new baby is born. Great news if you guys know Catherine Tong, my sister-in-law. She had a baby girl last night. Her name is Pearl. And I just thought, that's absolutely beautiful. But I also know there's a family in this congregation who lost a baby this week. Am I right? So how is it that God can be worshiped and glorified and honored in both of those situations? I can promise you this. He's sitting on his throne, and he loves all of us the exact same way, regardless of the circumstance. So whether it's good or whether it's bad, it is the God who is. The big reason that worship can be considered a discipline is because it's an ordered way of acting and living that sets up the transformation. So what I want to do is I want to give you a few ways that you can respond to God when the boom hits. Okay, everybody go tick. Okay, study God's word. That's one real quick way that you can develop your discipline of worship. Another one is to find time and be still before God. Another one is just to sit and praise God. Have you ever sat in your work chair and just began to bless God verbally? Have you ever done that? Have you ever tried that? Try singing. Just make sure you're alone if you can't sing. Music is this amazing art and thing that God has given us, and it stirs the soul. And there's so much of a difference when I'm with God and I say, God, you are good, and I sing, God, you are so good to me. Hear the difference? There's something about music that transforms the soul when we relate with God. And so regardless if you can sing, regardless if you can stay on pitch, that matters not. What matters is if your heart's sold out for him. Practice the movements of worship. When was the last time that you did this? Now, I'm staying here simply because I want you to see that this is possible in the human life. Most of you are okay with this, but this is much different. Why is this different? This is the lowest place I can be. This is the point where reverence meets intimacy and intimacy meets reverence. And if you're in a place where suddenly the Spirit of God falls, you're in a small group, you're in prayer in your closet, you're at work, and something on you says, get down, get down. It's okay. It's the way God designed it. Your body is supposed to be an expression of worship. So practice it. Maybe it's raising your hands. Maybe you've never done this before. Maybe when you're on the subway and you're standing amongst everybody, you go, yeah, I'm sure. I'm going to worship God. Remember, those of us who are reserved and find it terribly uncomfortable to do these things, I'm sorry, but you don't have a choice. Are you going to worship the way you're feeling comfortable, or are you going to worship the way God designed it? Now, here's the third part. You've got the foundation. You've developed your senses for God. You've now developed responses to God. What's the rest of this here? The rest of this is to keep the rhythm. Develop the rhythm. Worship is a deliberate and disciplined adventure in reality. It's not for the timid and it's not for the comfortable. It involves an opening of ourselves to the adventurous life of the Spirit. It makes all religious paraphernalia of temples and priests and rites and ceremonies and that seat right there all completely irrelevant. You're not going to experience God any differently based on the seat you choose to sit in when you come on Sunday morning. It involves a willingness to let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, so that as you teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. What begins to happen is a rhythm and a discipline and a lifestyle of worship. To keep the rhythm, two things have to happen. The first one is God has to initiate, right? Everybody go boom. That has to happen. Then another thing is the tick has to happen. Go tick. So it's got to be a boom and a tick. If the two don't exist, there's no worship. So both the things have to happen to create rhythm in worship. So two things have to happen then. One, we got to pray that we see God, right? We got to pray that he shows up. We got to pray that God would peel off the things that are in our eyes so we can see him working in our life. We've got to pray for revelation. We've got to pray for intervention. We've got to pray for the small moments in our life to be a moment where God is with us. And then the second part is we got to respond. We live as worshipers of the otherly in a culture of the ordinary. Society today attempts to explain everything, but when it comes to worship, not everything can be explained. And I know there are some of you today who can't explain why this is happening to me. Why is this happening? But I can promise you this. If you're willing to give your heart to God, if you're willing to let him be the God who is in the moment you find yourself, I promise you that the comfort and the security and the strength and the restoration that God has for you will be there for you in your time of need. In worship, explaining gives way to mystery, and mystery gives way to reverence and awe. We are to worship with understanding, but never complete understanding. Who can fathom the depth of God? Who can describe his unapproachable light? Who can predict his wonderful way? Who can measure the depth of his love? It's time now for a new sense in our songs and our souls. It's time for you to take a new step in worship. It's time for Moraine as a congregation to go to the next step with God. And that goes beyond this moment and goes into the moment that's out that glass door. A sense of wonder, a reverent intimacy and an intimate reverence, where friendship underlines fear and fear underpins friendship, where rejoicers tremble and where tremblers rejoice. More than anything, the call is for our lives to live out in holy obedience and face-down submission, for this is our greatest possible response to the glory of God. The beauty of this rhythm is that it can happen anytime, anywhere. The boom and the tick. God can initiate, he can intervene, he can interrupt, he can begin, he can create, he can usher in a brand new moment for you.